Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about form submission, how we can validate forms and properly submit the data back to the server. So let's get at it. I've already loaded up our HTML and our index.js. I have our HTML page shown over here on the right. You can see I've added additional elements for this. I have this form up here, but it's a simple form. I wanted something a little more complex. So we have this create account form, and you can see the DOM for that down here. It starts right here with this form class, and then it has a number of elements. One of the things I will point out is the structure that we have defined for this form. We're going to use that to our benefit in a little bit. And this is one of the things you can do as a developer. You can choose to have a certain convention when you create a form. The convention that I have here is I have this div that surrounds the whole element. So for example, let's go ahead and look at it in the browser. If I come over here and I right click and I inspect, I will find that element. Here's my input element. Here's the label associated with the input element. There's a span that's hidden right now. You can't see that. But then there's this wrapper element with a class of field. That's my convention, is I'm going to have this wrapper element with a class of field. There's a hidden somewhere in that wrapper, this span. And later on, we're going to see, for example, if I take off the hidden and I let this be shown, you can see that that's really my feedback to my user, my error. That's my convention. I'm building this form using some convention, and I'm going to use that convention to my advantage in my JavaScript. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to refresh this. Let's look at the console. It's just our empty, and we have our JavaScript page here. So let's start burning down our topics. So first of all, we already know how to access all these form elements. We have a couple of inputs here. There's an email, a password. There's a confirm password, and there's also this checkbox, and there's a button here. Those are all part of the form. And here, for example, is the code where I can get the email element. I can find the element by its ID, which is included on every input. So here's the input. You can see that down here, there's the ID. It's called email. I could also select it by its name if I wanted to. But in either case, I need a way of selecting the element, and I'm using the ID because I have access to the element. I'm going to put some test data in here so I don't have to always come in and type test at example.com, but I'm going to programmatically put in my test data. So let's go ahead and I'm going to do that for all of the elements. So I'm going to put a password. I'm going to set the confirm password just the same as the password, and I'm going to check our checkbox. So let's go ahead and refresh this page. And now you can see I have test data already pre-filled. That's going to save us some time. You don't have to see me text type all the time. I'm going to make our console window just a tad bit smaller so we can see everything in one shot. And there's my console. I'm logging out all these different elements and I'm accessing the value for that element. And that's one way that I can get access to the data that's being submitted in the form. If I get access to the element, then I can use the .value to get access to the value. And notice down here for the terms, the value it's showing on. But another way that I can look at it, because I know it's a checkbox, I can say terms element. And let's look at the checked property. If I refresh this again, you can see checked says true. So if I set it to false, you're going to see it says false. Now the reason that this terms value is returning on is because that's a default. Over here, I have my checkbox, which is right here. You can see it, required type checkbox. If I put the value in here, so we'll set the value to maybe T and C or something like that. And I refresh, you're gonna see the value is T and C, which is true because that's the value of the checkbox, but doesn't tell me if it's checked or not. So it's really important that we understand the difference between .value and .check. All right, so that's one way that we can get access to the values in our form. Another way is I can use document.forms, which is an element that's part of our document. It's already been parsed. And this forms takes an ID, create account. So I look at my form here. That form has an ID called create-account, which is what we're doing here. We're putting the ID in. And then I'm asking for what's the value for the email. That's another way for me to get access to the email element. And then of course I can add my .value here to get the value. If I just take some notes here, here is access via the elements. This is access via document.forms. Here is another way that I can access through the form element itself. So I'm going to get the form element using its ID, just like I had here. And then as part of my form element, there is an elements property that contains all the different values. So I have elements.email will give me the email element and the value of it. So I can console log out the element and also the value. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And you can see here my form That's my first thing that I'm console logging out. My next thing I'm logging out is the actual collection of elements. So it's all of them, the email, password, confirm password, terms. After that, I'm logging out the actual email element and then the email value here. So that's another way that I can access the different values that are in my input form. So another way that I can access all the form data is using the form data class. I can new up a class by providing an instance of the element, the form element, which I've already queried. And I'm just going to console log out the form data object. I'm going to use the dereferencing and we'll dereference the form data and we'll see that. And I'm also going to have this for loop here. So let's go ahead and refresh our page and see what we get. At the bottom, you can see I got the form data. If I open this, I got the prototype for it. And then I have all of these different methods on this class. So if I dereference it like this, what I'm going to get is I'm going to get 3 elements, and every element is an array that has a key and a value. So I get the key value pairs. Just like when I ran this for loop over all of the data entries here, I can get the key value pairs. So that's another way. So now you've got access through the elements directly, the document.forms, a form element on the form data. So which way you access your data is really up to you as a developer. Sometimes having it already collected for you is easiest. Other times, accessing the individual elements because maybe you have to do a little transformation or pre-processing on them is more important. It's really up to you and you get to choose. So what we're going to do next is we're going to run through a validation example using this particular form here. We saw this in the previous video a little bit. I added event listener to the submit, and that handler is going to get an instance of the event. We're going to write an example of turning this form into an AJAX request. So I already know that I want to prevent a default. I don't want the browser to ever actually submit this back. I want to do this on the client side. So if we were going to just write the steps. So first of all, there would be some client side validation. That's definitely the first step. We'll look at how to do this in just a moment. But after I validate, let's say I end up with a valid form, then I want to do the form submission. Can't spell today. There you go, form submission. And when you submit the form, the data is going to go back to the server. And on the server, you're going to get an opportunity to do server-side validation. It'll have a submit. You're going to do server-side validation plus whatever processing, and you're going to get a result. So that's going to all happen on the server. We're not going to cover anything on the server today. We're talking about JavaScript in the browser. So I'm just going to assume that we have some endpoint that will do all of that for us. It'll do server-side validation, whether it's in PHP or whether you got JavaScript on the server side or you're writing C++. It doesn't matter. There's some server that exists with some endpoint someplace that'll handle this request. Okay, so that's really it. As part of the client-side validation, I want to touch base first on HTML5 elements and the validation that they provide automatically for us. And so let's just do that real quick. If you want to learn more about HTML5 validation, W3 Schools is a good place. Here's your input types. I'll just widen this out a little bit here. The HTML5 input types. So for example, if you want to have an input that only allows emails, it'll automatically validate for you that a proper email has been entered. And then there's attributes that are associated with these. So for example, here's my input form attributes. I can make something read-only or required or disabled. But then there's additional things like size or max length or min and max attributes. So it's important that you use these HTML5 elements so that you can allow the browser to do the initial phase of the validation. So for example, if I come back to my stock picker and let's say I get this out here and I just enter some text and I try to create an account, you're going to see this happen. Please include an @ symbol in the address. I have no JavaScript that's doing that at all. The only thing that's happened is if I come up to my email component, right here's my email. If I scroll over, I can see its type was set to email and it's required. Same thing if I leave it blank and I try to create an account, it says, hey, please fill this in. So it's doing some validation for me. This is HTML5 validation, email required. On the passwords required, I typed in, it's a password, and that's why you see the ... So even no matter what you type in here, you're going to see that thing. For the checkbox down here, I can get rid of my value. I don't need that. There's already this required. So let's refresh our page. Let's uncheck the checkbox, and I'll try to submit it. And again, you see the HTML5 validation. You have to check this box if you want to proceed. So I get this HTML validation, and it's for free, right? I don't have to write any JavaScript to do it. It just happens automatically for me. But now there's validation that I need to do on my side. And I'm going to get a couple of variables here. I'm going to need them in a bit. These are the form and the submit button itself. I created a selector by ID, get my form, create account, and then I'm going to find the first button that's of type submit that's inside that form. So I got my two elements there. Now what I need to do is I need to get access to my data itself. And for this, I'm going to create a FormData class instance. So I got a FormData, got create form. By the way, this only works on elements that have a name attribute. So it's important that all your inputs that you're going to send back, they all have a name attribute, and these all do. But now I've got my form data, and I can use it like I did up here. So I can either dereference it or I can loop over them all. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a payload, a data payload that has the data, but it also has a flag whether it's valid or not. Let me just copy paste this in here and you can see what I mean. And let's go ahead and console log out data here. So you can see in the code, here's my data object. It's a JavaScript object that has these different properties. The email property is going to be set equal to the email value. The password properties, password value, confirm password. I got terms. Here I'm using has terms just to see if it's been selected or not. These we're going to get to in a moment. Just initialize them as true. That's a Boolean. And we're going to initialize this as an empty object. Let's go ahead and refresh our page. If I click create account, you're going to see this data object here. And what I've got in the data object is the confirm password, the email, there's no errors, is terms is set to true, is valid is set to true, and the password hasn't been validated yet. I just put all of my data into this validation object that I'm going to be using here. Here's my little note. So I'm building up this data payload. And this is an opportunity to scrub and transform. So for example, if you only want to compare uppercase passwords, then make this uppercase right here. You can transform that to uppercase. So the next thing I need to do is I'm going to actually do the validation itself. So for example, maybe the first one I want to do is I want to validate that the password and the confirm password are entered the same. So they're the same thing. Otherwise, I'm going to set an error for password to passwords do not match. And I'm going to set the Boolean here to false. Another validation that I want to have for this, if I look at this form, obviously I want to validate that this is an email that's already being done via HTML. I could do that via JavaScript also. So for example, I have this email regex that I could use to test my email string. So it looks like I might require a toString here. This is returning, I guess it's a form data entry value. So we'll just switch this to toString. If I don't pass the test, then you enter a valid email. So that might be another test there. And so far, we're just going to building up the validation errors bag here, and I'm setting this Boolean. The last thing here on this particular form is I want to make sure that checkbox is checked. We'll copy and paste that in. That might look like that. So if I click submit here, what do I have? I have, is it valid? It's true. There are no errors. Let's see if we can induce some errors. I can't just do this type of thing because when I submit this, my HTML validation is going to get hit first. So if I don't want that, I'm going to have to just make a few tweaks over here. And these tweaks are temporary. So I'm going to remove the required. Up here, I'm not going to have the type as email. I'm just going to enter text. And so let's see, I'm going to type in something that's obviously not an email. These are not going to match and I'm unchecked. I'm going to create the account and it says that I have to still check that. Oh, I removed it required from the confirm password. What I want to do is remove it down here from checkbox. Okay, so one more try. I refresh this. I enter something that's obviously not email. This is not going to match, and I uncheck it. I create the account, and then my data object has errors in the validation errors bag here. Email, password, terms. So it looks like my validation logic is working. And so another thing that we may need to do here is there may be some password strength validation that I have to do. And you can do this either on the client side or the server side, but maybe I want to say something like data.password.length. If it's less than say 5, then I will add something to my errors bag. So if I rerun this one more time, even if they match, let me pull this off. 3 letters. There's 3 letters. I submit and I get something in my errors bag saying the password must be at least 5 characters long. So now what do I do with this? I've did the validation, and now I need to have some code where I'm going to show these errors back to the user. So I'm going to drop in this because it's a bit of code. It's not too complex. It's more, I don't want to have to let you watch me type all this. But if we're not valid, we're going to provide that feedback to the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over every single error in the errors bag. I'm going to find the element that has that ID. Every single one of my inputs has an ID that matches exactly that name. Here's my input, has the name, email, has the ID of email. So they all match. So I'm going to find the element that has that ID, and then I'm going to go find the closest dot field. So I'm going to come back up to the wrapper class here, and then from the wrapper class, I'm going to select back into it and find the class that has the dot error class. If I find one of those, then we're following the convention that I'm expecting. And then I'm going to set the inner text for that equal to whatever the error value was that's in my errors array. And then finally, I remove this hidden class from my element, so it will show that. And down here, I'm enabling the submit button. Now, we're going to go up to the top because I never did disable the submit button, which I can do right here. I guess disabled is true. We'll set that here. And what this is going to do, this is going to prevent users from double clicking that submit. I can't go click, 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 and I have to be patient here. So I'm going to refresh this. Let's get our worst case scenario. So we fail them all. And so when I submit, then now I'm starting to get all this feedback for my form. Enter a valid password. Okay, so let's enter that, testexample.com. I submit. This doesn't go away. Let's see. Oh, because I never reset it. Probably as part of my validation is I'm going to reset. So I have my form already. I'm going to query all, and these are going to be spans that have this error class for each. We are going to add in the hidden class again. Okay, so this one line is going to reset our existing error. So I'm going to have to, unfortunately, refresh this. Let's go ahead and refresh. Let's get back to our worst case scenario. Nothing matches and I'm unchecked. I click, I show the errors. I set this to test. I refresh. That error now has disappeared. I make these match, but maybe they're too short. Submit. Password must be at least 5. Okay, we're going to put secret in here from both. Submit. And you can see how the errors are slowly but surely going away. Submit it. And I still see that because you know why? I put this inside my loop here. So this has to be on the outside. We'll just put this right, bubble this up to here. And that would take care of that last little issue that we had. Got my validation. At this point, if I make it down to here where I'm going to console log out the data, I know that I have valid data. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to submit this data back to my server. I'm going to cover how to do this in this episode, but we're also going to take a deeper dive into fetching and doing Ajax in a later episode. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste a bit of code here. So first of all, we're going to get some stuff from the form itself. So the URL from the form, I'm going to get the action attribute. So I come back over here, I come to my form, here's my form. The actions go into this URL right here. And this is just a mock endpoint. If I refresh this, I'm getting this message hello. So every time you post data to this or you HTTP get data to this, I'm just getting this response. So it's just an endpoint, it's just a mockbin.io endpoint. And then what I can do is from there, I can see every time it's been hit, right? I just hit this thing and I had some response. It's just an endpoint. We can see the response. We'll use that. So that's the URL that we're going to send the data to. The method is we're going to either use whatever method is in the form or we're going to post it. The payload is we're going to stringify our data that we just so carefully manicured. And then what we're going to use is we're going to use fetch. Fetch is part of the browser environment. It's really part of window.fetch. That's it, but you don't need the window. You can just call fetch itself. We're going to give it the URL, and then here is the payload. I'm going to say that the method is method headers. I'm going to put the content type is application/JSON, and then the body of this is going to be our payload. Now this fetch is an asynchronous function, returns a promise. In order to get the result, we should really add this then statement. So we'll do that. And I'm going to get some response from our endpoint, and we'll console log out that response just so you can see what it is. So let's see what this looks like. So if I have valid data, I'm going to call fetch. I'm going to post this to the URL because that's the post, and we're going to send this payload. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what we get. So I refresh this here. Everything's cleared out. I get the valid data. I'm going to create an account. Nothing's happened here. I don't really see anything that's happened. But if I go to my mockbin.io, I see a new post. And in there, I can see all the data that I just sent over. I HTTP posted it over. Let's look at our console. I get this response. It says 200, but I don't really see that message thing yet because it's sending back some JSON data in this body. And I get to that body, I have to read that stream. That's what we're going to do next. So normally what you'll see here is a response, get JSON. So this function .json, this returns another promise. So I can chain another .then on this. And for now, I'm just going to console log out. This is success. Here's the data. The other part of this is if there's ever an error, I can catch that error. And depending on what you want to do, you're going to do some processing here. We're not going to really do anything besides console log it. And then there's also a .finally. This is where you would wrap up any loose ends. So let's talk about what we're going to do here. So we're logging the data. The errors are not doing anything. Oh, one of the loose ends we have is we've disabled our submit button. So we want to enable our submit button again. When we process the data, when we get the data and it's successful, let's go ahead and see what that looks like now. So I click missing element. I must have messed up some JavaScript 141. I can just get rid of that. Add an extra curly brace in there. Okay, so now we're back. So when I create an account, you can see all of the steps I've got. I got the finally step. I got a success step with my data that I'm getting back from my endpoint. Probably what I would like to do here is just clear out this form as an indicator that it was successfully processed. So here, create form, I can call reset on my form. So I refresh this, I send it, it'll call reset to clear it out as an indication. In addition to resetting that form, probably want to have some other indication on your website here. I'm not going to do that in this video. I think it's getting long enough. But at this point, this is where you would think about what's the next step for the user. If you just created an account, maybe what you want to do is you want to redirect them now to the login page. So now they can log in, or redirect them to a page where now they can see their default page for their account. So what you do here, it's up to you, but it's kind of more application specific. And I'm not going to go any further with this, but just know there should be something else there. The part where we validate the form, starting about right here, convert this to an AJAX request, all of this stuff, it can get quite long, especially if this page is doing other things. So when you start to develop stuff like this, where it's quite long, you want to think about maybe using the concept of a JavaScript module or a class and encapsulate this into its own file. I've done that. I moved this all over to create an account here. So here's a create account form. I'm exporting this so I can use it as a module. It has a couple of private variables here. I'm using callbacks in this. We could raise a custom event, which we'll talk about in later episodes. But for now, there's 2 callbacks here. And so when you create one of these things, you're going to provide a success callback and an error callback. This thing gets initialized by listening for the submit on that form, which is hard-coded here. So it's not something that's reusable. Probably doesn't matter because this form contains a very specific element. It's not something that's general or generic anyways. But I add this event listener, and here's my submit handler. It has all the code that we just talked about. So there's this handle submit, I cancel the default, I get the button, I disable it. I have this call to validate data. So I put it into a function. It's a private method here, which collects all the data from the form, just like we just talked about. So here's all my validation that we just did. Here are, and then it returns this data object. Then I reset my errors. And if it's not valid, then I show all the errors to the user and I enable my submit button. Otherwise, I post data. And so post data is, again, it's a private member, asynchronous this time. I return a promise. I do this fetch that I just talked about inside of here. The only difference is I'm doing my callbacks. So if you registered on success callback, we're going to let you do something in addition to on success. So here's where on success, now maybe I want to redirect them to their login page or redirect them to their dashboard or whatever it is. And if it's an error, maybe I want to do something different. I want to redirect to an error page, or I want to show some details about what the error has happened. So then over here, all of that code, I don't really need any of that, right? I can do something like this. I can create a component. Let's give me some squiggles because I really haven't imported it yet. So let's go back to the import. Here's the import at the very top now. It is a .js file, create account, which is that. I'm going to create an instance of an object for that, giving it my on success callback and my on error callback, and right here they are. So now all of that code is contained in that file or a module, and I'm just importing it into here. I still have the same amount of code to maintain, but I'm separating out those concerns so that this file isn't one big file. It's a bunch of little files that are easier to maintain. So now this thing should still work. So if I come over here, I refresh this, I make sure the passwords don't match, I create an account, and Indeed, I get my error message coming back. A little bit cleaner way to organize our code. And we'll have a video in the future that is dedicated towards talking about code organization and making sure that we're developing a clean application, something that's easy to maintain. But that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about how we can dynamically create HTML elements using JavaScript. So we'll see you then.